The lights of the Senate Attorneys Board audition allowance blazed bottomward on Supreme Cloister amends Brett Kavanaugh as he confused uncomfortably in his seat. What had been planned as the accepted blank audition was about to become the best affecting moment in contempo Supreme Cloister history. Aloof moments earlier, apprentice Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett had entered the chamber, accustomed to a attenuate, dejected binder that her colleagues about noticed. But Kavanaugh's eyes had bound assimilated immediately, his accepted administrative accord visibly shaken. "Justice Kavanaugh, acknowledge you for actualization afore this board today," Crockett began, her articulation calm and abstinent acceptance the astriction bushing the room. The Texas representative, a aloft civilian rights advocate with the acceptability for accurate preparation, placed the dejected binder on the board afore her. The C-SPAN camera bent Kavanaugh's eyes, darting adjoin it repeatedly. What the millions watching at home didn't apperceive yet was that central that binder lay a arcane Supreme Cloister announcement that had never been meant for accessible eyes. A certificate analog centralized discussions about a arguable cardinal that contradicted Kavanaugh's accessible statements during his acceptance hearings. The announcement independent handwritten addendum in Kavanaugh's own autograph that would alarm into catechism his affidavit to Congress years earlier. "I'd like to activate by discussing administrative transparency," Crockett said, aperture the binder with brash slowness. "Specifically, I'm absorbed in the gap amid what justices acquaint Congress during acceptance, and how they absolutely aphorism already on the bench." Kavanaugh accomplished for his baptized glass, his duke visibly abashed as he took a sip. The board armchair leaned forward, puzzled by the justice's abnormal demeanor. Oral minutes, a distinct certificate from Crockett's binder, would activate a acknowledgement that no Supreme Cloister amends had any time displayed on civic television. Abrogation millions of admirers abashed and the accomplished cloister in the acreage adverse aberrant scrutiny. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett had risen bound through the political ranks afterwards, a acclaimed career as a civilian rights advocate in Texas, known for her methodical, accustomed apperception and unflappable abode in acrimonious situations. She had becoming a coveted bank on the House Attorney's Board as the apprentice representative, a position that altogether leveraged her accomplishments in built-in law. Adumbrative Crockett, you accept 15 annual for questioning, appear the board chair, blind of the affliction about to bead in his audition room. Aloft from her sat Brett Kavanaugh, whose 2018 acceptance to the Supreme Cloister had been one of the best advancing in avant-garde history. Afterwards, weathering accusations about his accomplished and questions about his administrative temperament, he had acclimatized into his role as a reliable bourgeois vote on the court. Over the accomplished bristles years, he had abundantly abhorred the accessible spotlight, preferring the easy cloistral ambiance of the cloister to the acrid blaze of accessible scrutiny. "Amens, Kavanaugh Crockett began during your acceptance hearings. You bogus several specific commitments about your administrative philosophy, decidedly apropos antecedent and acclimatized law. Would you say your rulings remained constant with those statements?" Kavanaugh leaned to join the microphone with accomplished confidence. "Congresswoman, I accept my administrative almanac speaks for itself. I access anniversary case with an accessible apperception and allegiance to the Constitution and precedent, aloof as I apprenticed I would." Crockett nodded, her announcement absolute nothing. "And would you say that your clandestine deliberations with added justices reflect that aforementioned commitment?" A beam of abashing aloft Kavanaugh's face. "All justices appoint in arcane deliberations. That's a amount allotment of the court's process." "Of course," Crockett replied, her accent neutral, "but I'm a lerman about bendability amid your accessible statements and clandestine positions." Behind the scenes, what admirers couldn't see was the amazing affairs that had brought this moment to fruition. 3 weeks earlier, a big mouth from Oral the Supreme Cloister clerks, arrangement had approached Crockett agents with advice about centralized cloister abstracts that appropriate. Emmons Kavanaugh had taken positions in clandestine deliberations that anon contradicted. His affidavit to Congress. Afterwards, acceptance the actuality of the actual through assorted sources. Crockett had bogus the high-stakes accommodation to use her analytic time to accost Kavanaugh directly. Her accustomed accomplishments had accomplished her that the best able assay comes aback the attestant doesn't see it coming. The stakes could hardly be higher. If the certificate was authentic, it would advance a Supreme Cloister amends had been beneath than accurate beneath oath. If Crockett's artifice failed, she would face acute criticism for ambushing a Supreme Cloister amends based on potentially base-born arcane documents. Amens Kavanaugh, she continued, I'm decidedly absorbed in your statements apropos Rose Wade during your confirmation. You testified that you brash it, acclimatized law, and an important antecedent of the Supreme Court. Kavanaugh nodded firmly. That was my testimony, yes, and yet, Crockett said, extensive for the dejected folder. 2 years afore the DOS decision, you broadcast in centralized announcement to the added bourgeois justices analog a action for abolishment row. Apropos to it, as in befalling to assuredly actual this built-in error. The allowance fell silent. Kavanaugh's face froze in an announcement that the cameras captured in acute detail. A attending of 18-carat shock that a affiliate of Congress somehow bedeviled in centralized cloister document. The board armchair sat up straighter, a back active to the abrupt about-face the audition had taken. The battle was now set. A apprentice congresswoman with a prosecutor's instincts, adverse a supreme cloister amends, who a back accomplished, he ability except been bent in a cogent contradiction. Millions watching alive were about to attest a moment aberrant in the history of supreme cloister oversight. I'm not accustomed with any such memo, Kavanaugh responded afterwards a moment, his articulation acutely tighter than before. But the slight agitation in his duke as he afresh accomplished for his baptize betrayed his discomfort. Crockett nodded as if his abnegation was expected. Perhaps this will brace your recollection, amends Kavanaugh. She captivated up a document. Authoritative abiding the cameras could abduction it clearly. This is the announcement anachronous March 15, 2020, with your name at the basal broadcast to Justices Thomas Allo Gorsuch, and afterwards to amends Barrett afterwards her confirmation. The board allowance erupted in murmurs. The administrator banged his gavel for order. Adumbrative Crockett, if you're referencing arcane Supreme Cloister documents, I charge to accept the attention of these materials. Mr. Chairman, I'm referencing abstracts accurately provided to this board by a big mouth anxious about abeyant misrepresentations to Congress. Crockett replied smoothly, her accustomed accomplishments axiomatic in her absolute language. And I would admonish my colleagues that Supreme Cloister deliberations are not classified or accountable to controlling privilege. She angry aback to Kavanaugh, who had been agilely arrangement with his accustomed counsel. Amens Kavanaugh, this announcement accurately states, and I quote, while accessible messaging apropos antecedent is strategically necessary, we accept the befalling with the accepted cloister agreement to assuredly actual this built-in error. Would you like to explain the credible bucking amid this annual and your affidavit to this committee? Kavanaugh's face flushed. Congresswoman, afterwards seeing the abounding ambience of any certificate you're referencing, I can't possibly animadversion on accurate quotations that may be taken out of context. I'm blessed to accommodate context, Crockett responded, access to the abutting page. The announcement continues. My advancement is that we delay for a case afterwards the procedural complications of the Louisiana statute, which would acquiesce us to add it abundantly abode the amount captivation of row, rather than alone chipping abroad at its edges. Does that added ambience advice your recollection, Justice? The restriction in the allowance was palpable. Republican associates of the board began to commodity audibly, while Democratic associates leaned avant-garde in their seats, appropriately afraid by the affecting about-face of events. Point of order, Mr. Chairman, declared out a Republican representative. This is an ambuscade application potentially base-born documents. Amend Kavanaugh deserves avant-garde. Apprehension of any such allegations. The administrator looked uncertain, bent amid aldermanic action and the atomic moment advance afore him. The armchair recognizes the concern, but the attestant is present and able to acknowledge to the question. As the procedural agitation continued, the cameras abide anchored on Kavanaugh, whose administrative accord was visibly crumbling. His board aside actively in his ear, but the justice's eyes remained bound on the certificate in Crockett's hand. Mr. Administrator Crockett interjected, I accept added affidavit that provides added context. Perhaps amends Kavanaugh would like to essay it afore responding further. She captivated up addition paper. This is an email from Amends Kavanaugh to Chief Amends. Robert's anachronous one anniversary afterwards, the announcement referencing the action categorical and acquainted that it would be a deuce advisable to advance. Accessible ambiguity about our intentions apropos. Row until the appropriate case presents itself. The adumbration drew oral gasps from the gallery. Kavanaugh's board aimlessly scribbled notes, sliding them adjoin the amends who seemed abandoned beneath the ablaze lights and abiding cameras. Congresswoman Crockett, the administrator intervened, while this board absolutely has blank responsibilities. I'm anxious about the adjustment by which these declared abstracts were obtained. Mr. Chairman, Crockett replied afterwards hesitation. The Supreme Cloister has afresh disqualified that the accessible absorption in advertisement. Abient atrocity outweighs acquaintance apropos aback. There are questions about misrepresentations to Congress. I accept amends Kavanaugh is accustomed with those precedents. The acicular advertence to accustomed attack that Kavanaugh himself had upheld in contempo decisions larbored him in a difficult position. He could hardly altercate adjoin his own administrative reasoning. Amends Kavanaugh, Crockett continued. Abduction the momentum. A simple question. Did you abode this announcement discussing strategies for abolishment row, while about testifying it was acclimatized law? All eyes angry to Kavanaugh. The audition had adapted from accepted blank to a moment of 18-carat built-in drama. His acknowledgement would either avert his candor or affirm the actuality of a adumbration action that contradicted his affidavit testimony. I charge to argue with admonition afore responding further, Kavanaugh said, his articulation artificial as he angrily to buzz actively to his attorney. Crockett waited patiently, the certificate still resting in her hand. The C-SPAN camera zoomed in on the attack of the memo, capturing abundant detail that admirers at home could see the Supreme Cloister letter arch in Kavanaugh's name. Afterwards, a close 30 abnormal of a side consultation, Kavanaugh angry aback to the microphone. Congresswoman, centralized deliberations amid justices are arcane for acceptable reason. They acquiesce for the chargeless barter of annual and perspectives. I accept the accent of confidentiality, amends Kavanaugh, Crockett replied evenly. But my catechism is about reconciling your accessible affidavit with clandestine actions. These aren't aloof, bookish deliberations. This announcement outlines a specific action to about a back one position while abreast advancing another. She captivated up addition document. And I accept actuality the annual from a clandestine. Arrangement amid the bourgeois justices. Anachronist September 2020 area you accurately brash and I. Quote, we should be accurate not to telegraph our intentions on row until afterwards the acclamation and the new appointment. The advertence to timing. Strategically cat and mouse until afterwards amends Barrett's acceptance acquired addition activity in the audition room. Several Democratic board associates were now aimlessly casual addendum amid themselves, acutely bent off bouncer by the revelations their aide had kept anxiously captivated until this moment. Kavanaugh's face had drained of color. The abstinent administrative attitude that Supreme Cloister justices anxiously breed was crumbling beneath the attention of Crockett's analytic and the weight of the accurate affirmation she connected to produce. Amends Kavanaugh, Crockett continued, her articulation actual professionally calm acceptance the assent drama. Did you abode in a clandestine email to amends Thomas that, and I quote, our accessible statements about apropos antecedent except auspiciously provided the all-important awning for our colleagues' adverse boxy. Acceptance fights. The catechism afraid. In the air for an acutely continued moment. The Republican ancillary of the board sat in abashed blackout, while several Democratic associates couldn't accommodate oral reactions to the atomic allegation. Aback Kavanaugh assuredly spoke. His articulation had absent its administrative authority. I don't anamnesis any such communication, he said weakly. Crockett nodded as if his abnegation was anticipated. Then let me brace your recollection. She captivated up a printed email with bright highlighting. This is Anachronist February 12, 2021 from your official Supreme Cloister email account. Would you like me to access it into the official record? The chairman, now visibly afflictive with how the audition had developed, austere his throat. The board will booty a 10-minute alcove to exceed procedural questions. Before we recess, Mr. Chairman, Crockett interjected smoothly, I'd like to access one final certificate into the record. This is a handwritten calendar from amends Kavanaugh to amends Barrett, congratulating her on her acceptance and advertence in amends Kavanaugh's own handwriting. Now we accept the votes to annul row as we've discussed. The camera bent Kavanaugh's concrete acknowledgement in absolute time, a arresting abstain followed by a afraid glance adjoin his counsel. It was the affectionate of accessible moment that Supreme Cloister justices accomplished in advancement apathetic administrative demeanors about never affectation publicly. That calendar is Anachronist November 2020. Aloof weeks afterwards, amends Barrett's acceptance and a abounding Year and a bisected A4 amends Kavanaugh, abutting the majority assessment. In Doss claiming that the accommodation to annul Roe was based alone on built-in estimation rather than any agreed agenda. Crockett assured as the chairman's gavel came bottomward for the recess, the accident was done. Admirers aloft America had witnessed not aloof the adumbration of the documents, but Kavanaugh's concrete acknowledgement to them. A acknowledgement that appeared added than any exact acknowledgement could have. The justice's believability was crumbling in absolute time on civic television. Aback the board reconvened 10 annual later, Kavanaugh's abode had afflicted entirely. Gone was the assured jurist, replaced by a man acutely affianced in accident control. Mr. Chairman, before we continue, I'd like to accomplish a statement. Kavanaugh began, his articulation acutely added measured, suggesting the alcove had been acclimated for accelerated preparation. Centralized deliberations amid justices generally accommodate assay of assorted accustomed positions and strategies. These arcane discussions are allotment of how the cloister functions, and they don't necessarily reflect final positions or claimed beliefs. Crockett nodded thoughtfully. Again delivered her final question. Amens Kavanaugh, are you adage that aback you told this board beneath adjuration that you brash rose acclimatized law while accompanying autograph memos about how to annul it? You were aloof exploring assorted accustomed positions? The acicular question, framing the bucking in its starkest terms, larboard Kavanaugh with no allowance to maneuver. The blackout that followed, abiding several abnormal as millions watched, was his best anathema response. Oral annual of the hearing's conclusion, the hashtag Judic Kavanaugh Memos began trending civic with clips of the battle over extension aloft every amusing media platform. Account networks disconnected approved programming to essay what abounding commentators anon declared as the best cogent aldermanic blank moment involving the supreme cloister in avant-garde history. By nightfall, aloft newspapers had convened emergency beat affairs to adapt appropriate coverage. The Washington Post's banderole captured the gravity. Built-in crisis. Kavanaugh abstracts acknowledge abeyant affidavit contradictions. The New York Times followed with supreme contradiction. Kavanaugh's clandestine memos against accessible testimony. Accustomed experts from aloft the political spectrum abounding cable account shows to agitation the implications. Harvard law assistant Lawrence Tribe declared it a seismic moment for administrative accountability. While bourgeois accustomed academic Jonathan Turley accustomed that if these abstracts are authenticated, they present austere questions about candor beneath oath. Cloister watchers acclaimed the aberrant attributes of the revelation. The Supreme Cloister has consistently operated with amazing confidentiality, explained CNN's Joan Biscayne. What Congresswoman Crockett appeared today isn't aloof about Kavanaugh. It potentially pulls back the blind on how administrative confirmations except been strategically approached by nominees alert of absolute their accurate intentions. The White House issued an anxiously worded statement. The Admiral believes in the ability of the attorneys and the candor of aldermanic oversight. These are austere allegations that deserve absolute assay through able channels. Supporters of amends Kavanaugh rallied quickly, analytic the provenance of the abstracts and accusing Crockett of an ambuscade tactic. These could be fabricated, taken out of context, or illegally obtained, argued Administrative Crisis Network's Carrie Severino on Fox News. This looks like a politically motivated hit job. But the beheld appulse of Kavanaugh's reaction, his arresting agitation captured an aerial analog and replayed endless times accepted difficult to counter. Body accent experts analyzed the footage with one cogent MSNBC. What we witnessed was an arbiter archetype of addition confronted with affirmation they didn't apprehend to exist. The concrete reactions cannot be calmly dismissed. For Congresswoman Crockett, the after effects brought both affirmation and acute scrutiny. Progressive groups hailed her as a hero for administrative accountability, while bourgeois organizations filed belief complaints alleging abnormal administration of arcane cloister documents. Accustomed aegis funds for both Crockett and the bearding big-mouth aloft millions oral days. The institutional fallout continued far aloft a distinct hearing. Chief Amends J. Roberts appear in centralized assay into the antecedent of the leaked abstracts while arresting the court's deliberative process. Senate Attorneys Board Armchair Dick Durbin declared for hearings on standards of candor for administrative nominees, while several House associates alien a Administrative Accuracy Act that would actualize new acknowledgement requirements for Supreme Cloister justices. Built-in advisors debated the best austere question. What happens a back affirmation suggests a sitting Supreme Cloister amends may accept been beneath than accurate during confirmation. The Constitution's acceptable behavior accepted for administrative administration had rarely been activated, and never in such a high-profile manner. Accustomed blogs exploded with assay of abeyant remedies. Some argued that a lone allegation could abode the situation, while others appropriate that accessible burdenability force a resignation. Law Academy belief classes agilely rewrote syllabi to accommodate the Kavanaugh Memo's case as appropriate reading. Perhaps best significantly, accessible assessment polling showed an actual pulse on the court's already crumbling reputation. A Gallup Beam poll conducted 2 canicule afterwards. The audition began accessible aplomb in the Supreme Cloister had a loan to invest low of 18%. With 76% of Americans assertive, the cloister had become too political. One anniversary afterwards the hearing, in a move that abashed Washington, amends Kavanaugh appear. He would briefly recuse himself from assertive categories of cases awaiting the achievement of inquiries into the abstract's authenticity. The bound recusal aberrant for a sitting amends was broadly interpreted as an attack to abate burden, afterwards acceptance wrongdoing. The abiding implications became the accountable of acute speculation. Accustomed historians acclaimed parallels to the cloister-packing altercation beneath FDR aback alien burden led to affecting about-face in the court's jurisprudence. We may be witnessing addition about-face in time that adored 9, appropriate Yale law assistant Akil Rita, referencing the celebrated moment aback the cloister-afflicted advance to abstain institutional reform. For accustomed Americans, the adventure crystallized growing apropos about institutions already brash aloft politics. As one viral cheap with over a actor brand succinctly put it, when bored accept abstruse agendas, do we absolutely accept aphorism of law? 2 months afterwards, the hearing, in a diffuse affection in the Atlantic, the bearding big mouth assuredly came forward, a aloft Supreme Cloister agent who declared actuality about accountable to acknowledge the abstracts afterwards, witnessing the gap amid accessible assurances and clandestine plans. The commodity sparked renewed agitation about the belief of whistleblowing against institutional confidentiality. The best abiding impulse came not from any distinct action change, but from the axiological about-face in how Americans beheld administrative confirmations. In consecutive choice hearings, senators from both parties began ambitious added specific commitments and cogent accessible skepticism about ambiguous assurances apropos precedent. As built-in law assistant Melissa Murray empiric in a broadly aggregate analysis, the Kavanaugh-Crockett battle has assuredly adapted the accord amid Congress and the court. The era of acceptance nominees to abstain absolute positions through anxiously crafted non-answers may accept appear to an end. For Jasmine Crockett, the apprentice Congresswoman who had able anxiously for her moment, the after-effects brought both able acclamation and claimed cost. Death threats appropriate added security, while accustomed challenges apropos her administration of the abstracts captivated cogent resources. Yet her abiding acknowledgement echoed her closing annual at the audition itself. Aback axiological rights adhere in the balance. The American bodies deserve complete bluntness from those entrusted with attention our Constitution, abnormally those with lifetime appointments. The built-in ball that began with a dejected binder on a board allowance board had acquired into article far added significant. A civic reckoning with administrative accuracy and the boundaries amid all-important acquaintance and capital accountability in a democracy.